Hey, I want to give you a quick rundown on my experience with swapping out the carbs on the 1200 Madura. There may be other and better ways to do this. This is how I did it. Getting the carbs off a Madura is not too difficult at all. Disconnect the throttle cable, the two choke cables. I think you can leave the decorative carb covers on and remove them along with the carbs. I don't know. I took them off first, though it is really difficult when the carbs are on the bike. Unbolt the tank, disconnect the low fuel light wires, raise the tank, and remove the fuel lines and vents. Loosen all 8 of the 4 inlet elbows and loosen the hose clamps and the hose clamp to the airbox connector section. I think you can remove the whole carb assembly to the right or left of the bike. I pulled them out the right side. Either way, one pair of intake elbows will have to be disconnected completely, the hose clamps and the 2 small bolts apiece, because they cannot pass the cam chain castings. Not too difficult, just wiggle it out. All 4 carbs are connected as a unit. If you are sending your carbs to an expert like Tracy on Facebook, leave them all connected. He will handle it from there. I can vouch for his work. It is brilliant. Getting the carbs back on a Madura is well known to be a little tricky. From what I have read over the years, the main issue is the rubber boots between the carb and the little intake elbows, and possibly the boots between the carb inlets and the airbox collector. They get hard and stiff over the years and can be difficult to join with the metal fittings on the carbs. I have heard tips like heating the boots in hot water, then squeezing in a short piece of PVC pipe that will make a tight fit, then stashing it all in a freezer for a few hours, then assembling them. I did not try that. I was able to get them on using a smear of white lithium grease. Maybe I was lucky and my rubber boots have a little flex in them, I don't know. They certainly seem to be rigid, but the grease did the trick. I was able to get them on and off and back on as needed. You will want to fit all 4 carb boots to the airbox. Squeeze it down good and snug and visually check that they are slipped in. There's nothing jammed, pinched, or twisted. Go ahead and tighten the 4 hose clamps. You can fit one side the intake elbows to the carb bottom, but the other side will need to be fitted once the carbs are in place of the bike. Use a thin dab of fuel-resistant RTV to keep the new O-rings in place in the intake elbows, just enough to keep them from falling out. Go ahead and get the airbox boot to the filter section fitted, but don't tighten yet. Be sure to reroute any plug wires, hoses, etc. That may be under the backbone. You will want every bit of space to fit in the carbs and airbox. Now comes the ultimate test of your skill and patience, starting and threading in all 8 of the small bolts that hold the intake elbows to the head. It really helps to have small hands. If you have fat hands like me, it's really difficult to get your fingers on the bolts and get them started. My advice is be very patient. It may take a while to get them started. You can wiggle the carb unit, do a little twisting with some padded pliers, etc., whatever it takes to get each hole lined up and get the bolts started cleanly. Leave the hose clamps loose. Don't tight any bolts all the way until they all are in. And if you think a bolt is cross-threaded, don't force it. It's either starting to cross-thread because you don't have it correctly aligned, or is in a bind because you don't have it correctly aligned. You really want to get it aligned so you can feel the bolts turning easily for 5 to 6 turns. What happens if you get a bolt cross-threaded? Let me tell you, I know. I got 7 of the 8 bolts in freely, but had trouble with one. It felt cross-threaded, and I thought, what the hell? I'll tighten it on down anyway. I probably won't live long enough to have to do this again. Problem with that is, you need to apply more force of the bolt to tighten it, and these bolts will snap off, or so I've heard. After removing the carbs and drilling out the broken bolt with a left-handed drill bit, and checking the threads, which were surprisingly still good, I started over. I used a few different bolts. Some may or may not work for you. When you go to tighten them, just lightly snug is fine. I could not find a torque value in the service manual, and you probably cannot get a torque wrench on them anyway. Be forewarned, the stock bolts will break pretty easily, so go easy. Use thread locker. Even if one or two loosen, all that will happen is a little air leak into the engine. You can always check them after a few hours and tighten them back if needed. Be sure to get the ground wire in place on this one. Once the 4 inlet elbows are in place and lightly snuggled in, connect the airbox clamp and the 4 elbow clamps. Connect the cables, fuel lines, and tank. I think that's it. Add fuel and wait for the pump to fill the carbs and hope it starts.